Not bad if I do say so myself. Yeah, all looking good so far. Maybe I should have considered a career as a photographer. Dust off the old cobwebs and go professional. I don't know. Let's just try and enjoy the day. Got a review for Spider-Man to film today. Let's just try and focus on that. Ah! Oh, what the hell was that? Is that a spider? Vision's going funny. Not good. Oh, please don't be poisonous. Oh, just sit down. Just sit down. Just sit down. Ooh, this really doesn't feel good. Wait. I feel kind of tingly. Like there's energy surging through me. This feels good. Maybe that spider wasn't poisonous at all. Maybe it was radioactive. Maybe it's giving me superpowers. Maybe after all this time I can finally be a super... I'm alive! Hello guys, welcome back to Rewind Reviews. Today we're going all the way back to 2002 to review a movie that I pretty much grew up with, and that is Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. Directed by Sam Raimi, written by David Koepp and based on the Marvel Comics character created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, the 2002 movie sees teenager Peter Parker being bitten by a genetically modified spider and gaining amazing spider-like abilities that he eventually must use to fight evil as a superhero after tragedy befalls his family. Putting his newfound powers to use fighting crime, he eventually comes into conflict with his arch nemesis, the Green Goblin. Honestly, it made me feel old when I saw how old this movie actually was. This was one of the first movies that I ever remember being excited to see, because there wasn't a lot of big movies that were out around the time. I was quite young when this film came out, and like the only real superhero movies that were out were like the early Batman movies that Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher had done, and the Superman movies, but I hadn't really sort of watched those at that point in time. X-Men was... I did see X-Men before this one, so I'm not quite sure how the timeline sort of works, when my memory works with that. But it was definitely like some of my earlier memories of like the internet, because we didn't really have like the geek culture that we sort of have today, where it's like any sort of tiny bit of news from one of the producers or the writer or the people who've worked on the movie, even just like an insider who might not have even been near the movie. Any little bit of information now is just there online. So this movie sort of came out way before that, and the teaser trailer I remember being released online, and it was something that I would just watch again and again, because it really did blow me away. I'm thinking like, we are actually getting a proper Spider-Man movie, and it blew my mind that it was even going to be happening. When I say the trailer, I mean the very first teaser trailer that was ever released, the one that had the Twin Towers in it. It is a great sequence, and I believe it actually was meant to be in the movie. I think that was meant to be like his big reveal scene, but obviously with 9/11 happening, and that couldn't really happen because of like the movie came out in 2002, which May 2002, so this was literally like months after that event took place. So I definitely understand why they would have removed a sequence like that. You know, years later when I was sort of looking this up, because I remembered watching this trailer and it just seemed to sort of disappear and nobody could really sort of find it, and then it just sort of popped up again online, and it was great just seeing that and just sort of reminding myself of how I felt when I first saw that. But then I ended up seeing a Comic-Con trailer that was released in 2001, and I'm quite surprised at how different some of this stuff actually is. Like some of the CG shots are definitely like computer game graphics, but then there's even shots of like Tobey Maguire wearing like web shooters and all sorts, so I don't know how different the movie was back in 2001 before did they change it or something. But it was just a really sort of weird rabbit holes that I'll get drawn into, so I'm sort of rambling on about this one. Let's move on. As you've probably guessed from t-shirt posters, just general stuff that I've done on this channel, including the little intro for this one, I am a huge Spider-Man fan. He is by far one of my favourite characters, not just like superheroes, I mean characters of all time. My introduction to him was through the 1994 animated series. That to me was kind of like the definitive version of the character for a long time, and that's kind of why I was so excited to see what it was that a live action movie could do. Even just getting older and all these different interpretations coming out, it's still a character that I still love and I still want to see more adventures from. There's so many different interpretations of this character that it was quite strange sort of going back and revisiting this movie because of all those memories that I have of it growing up. That 1994 show not only made me a fan of Spider-Man, it made me a fan of Marvel. It introduced me to so many characters, including Blade and Punisher and the Fantastic Four. From that I started getting more invested in other superheroes and finding out the differences between Marvel and DC, finding out about Dark Horse and all these different things. My comic book geekdom all kind of came from Spider-Man, so I've always held the character very close to my heart because he was the one who kind of started it all for me. I'm definitely not alone on this. And when it comes to the live action movies that we had from like the 2000s onwards, I would say that this movie, Spider-Man 2002, is kind of like the gateway movie. It's the movie that really sort of like pushed the superhero movies into like, wait, we can actually do these now. Because like, yeah, we did have Blade, we did have the X-Men, but Blade was very much an adult movie. It's rated an 18, it's rated an R, it is meant for adults, so you're not really going to have like the kid audience. And then X-Men, I don't know if they're as mainstream, especially back in 2000. I don't know if the general audience would have been too aware of them. They might have been aware of Wolverine and that's why they were kind of pushing him to be like the main character in it. But for general audiences, I don't think the X-Men are as well known as Spider-Man, who I would honestly say is one of the most iconic characters ever created, up there with Batman and Superman. I would honestly say that this is the movie that kind of set the stage for what superhero movies would come from 2002 all the way through to 2008 when Iron Man was released and the MCU began. This is the one that for me was the one that really sort of kick-started it. But is it still good? Let's have a look. So when it comes to the cast, we've got Tobey Maguire starring as Spider-Man, we've got Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin, Kirsten Dunst, James Franco, Cliff Robertson, Rosemary Harris, J.K. Simmons. There are so many big names that are part of this movie that you would definitely recognise from big movies that have come out over the past few years. And when it comes to their performances in this movie, I do feel like everybody is good. There is definitely a cheesiness to it, but they do capture a lot of the comic book vibe. This movie is very much inspired by like the early Steve Ditko era comics, so it does have that sort of lighter sort of tone that you wouldn't really find in like a lot of the more modern Spider-Man interpretations. And when it comes to Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man, personally I don't think that necessarily he's the best interpretation of the character that we've gotten, because I think every single person who has played him has brought something very unique to this character. And for me, when it comes to Tobey's performance, I feel as the Spider-Man part of his persona, it's a lot more mature, it's not quite quippy, it's somebody who's a lot more superheroic than you probably would expect somebody like Spider-Man to be. But when it comes to the Peter Parker side of his character, that's where Tobey Maguire actually does excel, because he does have that sort of natural sort of shy nerdiness to him that it does feel very real and very believable, and I feel like that is a really good contrast to how he is as Spider-Man. And I do understand that there are a lot of people who are very passionate about his interpretation of this character. They will still defend him as like the best interpretation of the character to the ends of the earth, saying he's the OG, the greatest of all time, even though there were others who were there before him. But he is genuinely good in the role. I do genuinely like his performance. I just feel like the Spider-Man part could have been just a little bit stronger. And honestly, when it comes to everyone else who does take part in this movie, like Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane, I think she is very good. I don't think she has a lot to do. I think this is the only time to really sort of focus on her character a little bit more, because we do get a little bit of an insight into like her home life. That's really it with her character. I do like the performance that she gives, and I do think that she is pretty good in this role. And then like James Franco as well, he's brilliant as Harry Osborn. I like the way that they sort of change him as the movie goes on. and ultimately sets him up for like future installments, and it is really well set up. Rosemary Harris as Aunt May, again, I really do like her casting. I think she is really good for this role. I don't necessarily think she's the best interpretation of this character, but I feel like she is the right age for this, and I feel like the sort of soft performance and the way that she's has this empathy towards people, that to me is what Aunt May really needs to have. I do feel like they sort of go a little bit overboard with it a little bit, but it is a really great performance, and I really do love that she was included in this movie. And there's absolutely no way that I can do this without mentioning J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. J.K. Simmons is to Jonah Jameson what Hugh Jackman is to Wolverine and Robert Downey Jr. is to Iron Man. He is such perfect casting. He is absolutely brilliant in this role, and I can't find a single person who has ever said a negative thing about him. He is brilliant for this part. I really love the energy that he brings to it. He really has this really sort of nastiness to him, but he's kind of good at the same time. There's so much to him that I genuinely love having him in this movie. I really love the direction that they go with him. I love how accurate to the comics he is. I know Stan Lee always said he wanted to play the role, but I just don't think he would have been as good as J.K. Simmons. I really do love him in this performance. Of course, yes, this is a Spider-Man movie, so we do have a villain, and of course this is the first big screen Spider-Man movie that we've had, so who do you go for? Well, let's go for the Green Goblin. Apparently Willem Dafoe, who does play the Green Goblin, and Norman Osborn, I believe he really did push for this role. Like, he really wanted to be part of this movie, and honestly it really comes through. He is phenomenal in this movie. He's one of my favourite actors. I love his performance in this. I love the contrast between the Norman Osborn stuff and the Green Goblin. I love how he's able to shift between the two personalities. That sequence where he's having a conversation with himself in the mirror is really good. I love how it's edited as well, the way that it sort of starts off from the perspective of him like walking up to it, so you sort of see like the Norman and then the Goblin, and then the way that it keeps sort of cutting back and forth, a bit like what they did with Gollum in Lord of the Rings. The performance is genuinely fantastic. The only drawback is the mask. As we've seen with No Way Home, we really do know just how much of his performance is actually hidden. He's so expressive, he's just, you don't even need the mask. He's got that sort of goblin sort of look that he's just able to give, and the mask just covers it all up. I know they tried doing that thing where they sort of show his eyes underneath the yellow lenses and you can kind of see his mouth peeking through, but a lot of the scenes you really can't, so it does cover a lot of that performance, and it's just the voice alone. It is an epic villain voice, it's absolutely brilliant for the Goblin, but it just would have been great to have seen a bit more of it. The annoying thing is, they did design a rubber version of the mask which would allow him to actually move and talk and everything, and it had like these animatronic eyebrows that would like flex and move, and it looked amazing. It's absolutely phenomenal, but they don't use it for some reason. The footage is out there on YouTube, and I will have put that over this segment, but it really was confusing why it was they decided to go with like basically like a Power Rangers sort of style helmet. But I also find it quite funny how like whenever he's as Norman Osborn, he wears prosthetic teeth to make them look all sort of straight and nice and pearly white, and then when he becomes a Goblin they take them out, so he's just got like his normal sort of slightly more jagged teeth. It's subtle, and honestly I've never even really noticed it, but it's just a nice little detail, and honestly he is a brilliant part of this movie, and honestly I think the movie would be pretty weak without him. I said there is definitely a cheesiness to a lot of the performances, and I feel like that is definitely more geared towards the script than anything else, because a lot of like the chemistry, you know, in the way that like in like the Avengers for instance, where you've got all these characters interacting and they're just bouncing off each other, and there is like this really natural sort of chemistry and like bonds between them all. I don't really feel like that's in this one too much. I feel like the chemistry really kind of comes from more the script than anything else, because there are scenes where it does seem a little bit stilted and you sort of think that it could be quite a funny sequence, but it's kind of not, it's a little bit awkward, which it's kind of in character, but it's kind of not at the same time. But you can tell that everyone is genuinely having fun and really enjoying themselves in this movie, and that's one of the reasons why the performances do work, because everyone is giving their all and they are really invested in this film. I was going to mention the goblin costume, might as well just talk about the costumes. So when it comes to like the goblin costume, I think it looks alright. It's definitely not the direction that I would have really got. If I was in charge, that's not the direction I would have got. I honestly think that what they did in No Way Home is probably the best depiction of the Goblin personally, but I really do like the armoured look. The only thing that I would have liked to have seen a bit more of is a bit more of like the purple sort of tinge to it, because like there is purple there. It's like this really sort of weird thing where it's like where it catches the light and it starts sort of shining purple, especially around like the heads and like the shoulders and things like that, but you can't always see it a lot, especially when there's like a lot of nighttime sequences. And as I say, like the helmet does cover a lot of the performance. I do like that he is able to move and all sorts. I like the way that the glider looks as well, but it's not my favourite villain costume. And when it comes to the Spider-Man one, I think the homemade one that he has during the wrestling arena is really good, and I like how it sort of echoes what his costume is going to be in the future. It's something that I did bring up in the Amazing Spider-Man review. I really hated that costume look. That's kind of what the homemade costume is meant to sort of be. It's meant to sort of like represent what the future costume is going to look like, and that's what the Amazing Spider-Man just didn't do. This one does look really good. I like how it is homemade. I love that it is something that like a 17-year-old would literally just grab and just use and put together. But then when it comes to like the main costume itself, yes, visually it's one of the most accurate costumes we've had on screen. It looks great in motion. I love the way that they've depicted the Spidey logo. I think the Spidey logo on the back is probably my favourite out of all of the different versions that we've had. The only drawback that I can really think of it is more the actual believability in it, because he's meant to be 18 years old and this is what he's able to make. Unless you like study sewing and you have degrees and all sorts in it, I don't think you would be making something like that. That's the only real drawback I can think of when it comes to that costume. But other than that, it is a genuinely good interpretation of this costume. He doesn't have like the web shooters or anything, because the direction that they decided to go with this one, they decided to just completely remove them. I believe James Cameron was developing a Spider-Man movie in the 90s, which is going to be like a properly adult version of this character. I think Electro and all sorts were going to be a part of it, and one of the things that he decided that he wanted to do was have organic web shooters, and that's something that did carry on into this movie. I don't know how far through it was before they decided to do that, because as I said, Comic-Con trailer, he's got web shooters on, but they decided to go along with the organic ones. I've never really been a fan of them. As I said, 94 fan, so I'm quite familiar with the web shooters, so even though I thought it was a bit strange back then, I still don't really know how to feel about it. I like the jokes in No Way Home, but it is just a really odd decision for them to go with, because yeah, like biologically that's not where the webs will be coming out. I don't think anyone would really want to see where they actually would. But when it comes to how they're actually depicted, they're okay, but there's not much variety to them. That's one of the things that like the Tom Holland one sort of absolutely nailed, because he can do all the different web shooter combinations and all sorts. You can't really do that with these organic ones. They're literally just going to be like just, and that's it. You can't do much more with them. And it also removes a lot of the stakes as well, because one of the things that me and a lot of other Spider-Man fans really do enjoy seeing is when he runs out of webs. You know, he's chasing after like Big Wheel or something like that, and then right when he's about to get them, oh dear, he's out, and he's either got to like recharge and like reload them, or he can't pursue them anymore. And I feel like that's something that is now missing because of that. So there's a slightly long-winded way of me basically saying that I'm not a huge fan of that change. But when it comes to the actual story, this to me is probably the definitive origin story. It hits all the beats. It definitely gives you the information that you need to really understand who Spider-Man is and where he comes from. It has like the wrestling arena. It has him basically wanting to be Spider-Man for selfish reasons, and then eventually starting to learn that no, he's got these powers and he's got a responsibility to use them to help people. I love how that is built up. I like where the villain's introduced, I like the connection that they sort of establish. I think it is paced well. I do think that for a movie that is just under 2 hours, it does work, and they go through a lot. There are definitely things that they do change. There are definitely elements that they have like tweaked for a slightly more modern audience. And one of the things that he did sort of change is Uncle Ben's death, which, if you are familiar with the comics, you are kind of aware that this is a departure from what happens, because in the comics, even in the cartoon series, it's meant to be that the guy at the wrestling arena gets robbed and the thief runs off, and that's really sort of the last you see of him. And then when the time Peter gets home, you realise that there's been a break-in and somebody's robbed the place, and it turns out to be the same guy. I feel like this does work a little bit better, and I feel like it does sort of smooth things over a bit more, because it was slightly sort of convenient that that's the exact house that the thief sort of breaks into. So it does work. I do like how that is portrayed, and I like how it does motivate Peter to go after this guy and the revelation of it as well. But everything is really well paced out for this film. The story is really well executed. I like how everything sort of builds up. There's a good clear 3-act structure to it, and I really do like how everything does fit together. This is a Sam Raimi movie, and obviously he does have his own style. Like, if you've ever seen the Evil Dead movies, you're sort of aware of a few of the little camera tricks and movements that he can do and little editing techniques that he has. This movie does have a few speckles of them, and there are definitely a lot of those elements that can sort of add to the cheesiness of it, but it sort of works for the style that they are going for, because it does have a comic booky sort of echo to it. I don't feel like this is like definitive Sam Raimi, because I feel like what he was able to do in the second movie amplifies a lot of those elements, and I feel like that works a lot more. But it does work very well in this movie, and it does give it its own personality. You would still be able to know that this is definitely a Sam Raimi movie, and you would know that this is Spider-Man as well. One of the things that I mentioned in my Amazing Spider-Man review was that I kind of felt like this movie was very much more of a fantasy, whereas that movie was more sci-fi. And I do still stand by that, because this does have a lot of fantasy elements to it. It's very romanticised, and it's got a lot of nice moments to it. It kind of reminds me quite a lot of the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, which this trilogy does have a lot of similarities to, and not a lot of people really bring this up, because the Superman movies are very much fantasy. There are echoes of sci-fi elements in there, just like Spider-Man movies, but they are very much more focused on the fantasy, the romance as well, and even like the structure for it's quite similar as well, because like we've got like the first movie sort of establishing the characters, the origin story, giving us the backgrounds and everything, and including probably the most iconic supervillain that the hero's gone up against. And then the second movie is an improvement in a way where they've sort of pushed things a lot further. There's a bit more action, there's a bit more mythology and lore and all sorts getting added in. And you also have a more of a fan favourite villain being included, and you also have a good chunk of the movie where the hero doesn't have their abilities, and then eventually having to get their powers back in order to take on the villain once again. And then the third film being the hero embracing their darker elements. A substance from space sort of corrupts them and brings out their darker side, leading up to a fight with their lighter and darker selves. So I don't know what Spider-Man 4 would have been. But one of the things that I do need to sort of take into account is the time that this movie did come out, because yeah, this was made around 9/11. This was, I don't know how far before 9/11 happened that they'd filmed it. That definitely did have a bit of an impact on this movie. There's definitely a few edits that would change. As I said, the bank robbery was probably supposed to be in this movie. That was removed. There are still shots where you can kind of see the Twin Towers in the background, especially that shot of Spider-Man where it like zooms out from his eye lens. You can see them there, and I feel like that bank robbery was meant to be like that introduction. So I don't know how much of it was edited to either go around them, or if there was any sequences that needed to be sort of tweaked or anything, whether there was any reshoots. I really don't know that stuff, and I do feel like there are definitely things that were sort of changed so that it wasn't going to be quite a heavy movie, considering that New York was very much in a sensitive place at that point in time, and this was a movie that needed to be lighter and a lot more enjoyable, and I feel like that does work very well, especially for the time. But even today, it is still a very enjoyable film, and I feel like having it be a lot more fantastical really does help that. You know, I do like it when Spider-Man does get dark, and there are definitely dark elements in this. There are some moments that sort sort of go a bit horror-like, but there's not many of them. But it is nice having something that does have a light-heartedness to it, and I really do enjoy that this is a movie that you can watch with anyone. It's kind of funny that I'm bringing that up because this movie came out before something called a 12A rating was introduced. I don't think that the US have anything like this. I think it's just PG-13. For us in the UK, we had an age rating where it's a U, a PG, 12, 15, 18. 12, 15, 18 basically means if you are that age and over, then you can buy it or you can watch it, no problem. But if you're under it, you can't get in. Around about 2002, 2003, they introduced a 12A rating, which basically meant if you're 12 years and younger, you can go in as long as you're accompanied by an adult. And basically every single comic book movie from that point on that was rated 12 was now a 12A. So kids could now go in to go and see this movie. And I think that Spider-Man was the movie that sort of made it happen, because Sony basically saw how many kids know who Spider-Man is, love the character, but couldn't go and see it because it was a 12. And that's the predicament that I was in, because I wasn't 12 at the time, so I wasn't able to go and see this in the cinema. So I had to wait for it to come out on DVD before I got a chance to see it. And even though there are definitely moments where it can get a little bit maturer, I do still think that this is a movie that everyone can watch. Speaking from experience, young me, absolutely no problem sitting through this really enjoyable movie, all the way up to my gran, who at this point in time is in her 90s, and even she enjoyed it. I will quite happily testify that yeah, this is a movie that everybody can enjoy of any age. When it comes to the action sequences, I do think that they are good, but they are very staged. They do have kind of like a bit of, I mentioned Power Rangers a bit earlier, so I've got to kind of stick with that. Even though I don't really sort of watch Power Rangers, I haven't watched Power Rangers in decades at this point, but it does kind of have that sort of vibe to it, where it is very much like just like a punchy sort of thing with the really amped up sound effects of kind of thing. But the stunt work and everything is really good. I like how practical it is. There's a lot of wire work and a lot of animatronics and all sorts, like the gliders actually moving around and everything. It's really good, and honestly you are invested and engaged enough in what's going on that honestly the campiness to it really doesn't bother you that much. And because of how practical it is, it does mean that a lot of the effects that they do use do still hold up pretty well. Not everything does hold up, but there are some really great effects that do still look really good today. The biggest things that I can really think of that don't quite look as good as they probably could do are some of the CG models of like when they go into like full 3D mode, when Spidey like swinging around the city. There's a few moments where he does look a little bit cartoony here and there, especially like when he's in his homemade suit pursuing the thief. But honestly, I think the effects really do look pretty good. I think one of my favourite effects is actually the depiction of the spider sense, where it's sort of like the camera sort of like full Sam Raimi sort of modes. It's like sort of like zooms in on his eyes. You have like that horrible sort of violin noise and then it's like the camera sort of like zips around to whatever the danger is. It looks great. I love the depiction of it, and I like how it sort of shows his sense at work. It's funny mentioning like the CG models being a bit weird, because like this is kind of the time where a lot of movies were doing this, because it was quite a new technology that was being utilised. And I feel like out of the ones I can think of that were out around the time, I do think this is definitely one of the better versions, one of the better ones, because we had things like X-Men, which did have a CG double during like the Statue of Liberty sequence. It doesn't look good. And then we have like Blade 2, where for some reason right slap bang in one of the action sequences they turn into CG doubles. It doesn't look good. And then even like the Matrix Reloaded, where we've got like the Smith fight where all of them are coming out trying to attack Neo. It doesn't look good. Spider-Man's the only one that I think does hold up enough that honestly you probably won't notice it that much, and because you're so invested in what's going on, it doesn't really distract you. The one thing that does make me laugh a little bit is that there was a very specific technical problem with the costumes. For anyone who isn't aware of how green screen works, essentially what they do is they use a chroma key, which basically means that they choose a specific colour to get rid of. So if like I was doing like a thing and I wanted to like change the colour of my shirt, I would choose the chroma key as red and I would select my shirt, and that would sort of make my shirt disappear. So when you have characters who wear green and you put them in front of a green screen, you can kind of guess what happens. So of course you'd put them in front of a blue screen. Problem is, the other character also wears blue, so you can't really have the two of them on screen together. And I don't really know how they actually got around it, but it does work and it does look fine. I think that's kind of why like the blue was sort of toned down quite a bit for the Spidey costume, even though like the early comics he actually wore like a black costume. I do think it does work very well, and honestly there's no hiccups or anything that looks off. It does work really well. Just a fun bit of trivia for you. The musical score for this movie was composed by Danny Elfman, and honestly this is epic. Like that opening title sequence gives you chills because like the soundtrack is really good. It is so well known. It's definitely one of the more iconic Marvel soundtracks that we have had. It definitely hones in on a lot of the more heroic superhero side of Spider-Man, and I like the subtler themes of like Peter and MJ. I do like those themes quite a bit. There are definitely echoes of Danny Elfman's Batman theme in this, just a little bit, but it is very distinctive, and I really do think this is something that you will remember if you did hear it. I don't think that this is his best soundtrack, as I said. I think Batman's probably the best one, but that's just my opinion. But honestly, this is one of the best ones I do think he has made, and I think that honestly I think this is probably like the second best one that he has done. There are a couple songs here and there that are sort of dotted in and out of the movie, and like they're fine for the sequences. I like the sequence where they're at the community event and they've just got some of those songs in the background. Like, none of them really sort of tie into the story or anything. They're just kind of there to sort of like promote the album, and it's fine. But of course, like we've got well, technically Nickelback doing Hero, which I think most people will agree is probably one of their best songs. And honestly, it's such a well-known iconic song. It really does suit this movie. I genuinely do love the song. It is so fitting for this character, and honestly I'm so glad that they got a chance to actually do this kind of song because they haven't really done that since. Like, most movies used to kind of have that in the credits where they'd have like a few vocal songs like during the opening, well, the closing credit sequences, and like that's something that's kind of like disappeared over the years, and I kind of would like to have that be brought back. Like the DC movies do it, and that kind of reminds me of this time, like, having like the Sam Raimi movies as well, because like all three of these films do have their own distinct song, and all of them are really good and do suit that movie. But then the Amazing Spider-Man movies, no, there's none of that. Even the Home trilogy, it is a really strange thing for me to really sort of bring up, but yeah, it is something that I do miss and I would like to see be brought back, because songs and music do have just as big an effect as the story and the characters, and having songs that you connect to the characters or the movie or just something about the film, it really does help, so that as soon as you hear the song you're immediately reminded of the film. You know, when I was thinking about what to say for this review, and I was sort of thinking about all the things that I was sort of doing at the time, as like when this movie did come out, because of like my experience with the cartoon series, and it just got me thinking about things like fuck kids and genetics and all these other things. It just sort of opened up these floodgates of, oh my god, I missed all this, and it was just such a trip down memory lane, because like this was a big movie for me when it came out, and it just really brought back a lot of those old memories. Nostalgia is a very powerful thing, and I think Hollywood's definitely kind of twigged that that's a thing, and they've kind of been sort of weaponising it in a way to sort of get people to feel like, oh, this movie was absolutely amazing because I felt so good, but it's only because you're sort of reminded of other things. A part of me does wonder if the people who are adamant that these Spider-Man movies are the best that we've ever had might be letting nostalgia kind of cloud that a little bit, because there are definitely issues, there are definitely problems with these movies, even though the first two are genuinely good, but the third one does have a lot of problems. I do feel like because people do look back on them, because people like me have grown up with these films, you're more likely to look back on them with like really fond memories, which I do, but because I'm doing like a proper professional review, I want to be open and honest and give like a proper review and critique of it. So I've got to make sure that those nostalgic sort of memories don't affect the review in some way, which is hard to do, especially when it's a movie like this, which really did connect with me when I was younger. But seeing the way that like the online community is, and there is a lot of toxicity that is swirling around with a lot of different fan groups. It's not limited to one or another, it's every sort of group. There is going to be that small fraction that does have that like, no, this is we are adamant that this is the definitive thing, or this has absolutely ruined it. People can like and dislike what they want, and I feel like if people are a bit more open about it and they're able to sort of listen to how other people do feel about it without being nasty or throwing out insults or anything like that, it would be a hell of a lot nicer. And like the Spider-Man fan base is similar, because like there are people like me who will look at each performance, each series, and say like, these had some great moments, these had some great moments, these had some great moments, but they all have issues of some kind or another. Each of them have their strengths and weaknesses. You know, if you prefer one over the other, then that's absolutely fine, that's up to you. Just try not to impose your opinions on other people and act like that's fact. Like, if you agree with me in these reviews, great, that's absolutely fine. If you disagree with me, great, that's absolutely fine. Let me know what you thought down below, I'd love to hear it. Let's get back to the review, shall we? Overall, I still think that this is a very fun, it's very engaging movie. It is definitely the definitive version of the origin story. It may not have all the elements that I do want to see from a Spider-Man movie, but this is definitely one of the better ones that we have had. It has a very distinct style. It blends a lot of the superhero elements with a little bit of horror here and there. The casting is really good, the music is great, the cinematography, the direction, the editing, it is all really good, but there are definitely issues and problems with it. It can get a bit cheesy, it can get a little bit too camp. There are definitely elements that I think that they could have removed or changed here and there. Costumes, I think mostly good, but sometimes can cover up a lot of the performances, like the helmet thing that they always put under the Spider-Man mask. I've never liked, because it always stops the mouth bit from moving, because it's supposed to be just fabric. But that is me being very nitpicky. It's not the best movie that's ever been made, it's not the best Spider-Man movie ever made, but it is definitely good. And with everything that's being said, my rating for this movie is 8 out of 10. At one point in time, this could have been the start of some sort of Marvel cinematic universe, because like, obviously like, we always have Stan Lee making an appearance here and there. Apparently he had like 2 sequences, one of them is in the movie, the other isn't, where apparently he is trying to sell Peter Parker's sunglasses, and he's like, hey, do you like these? They wore them in the X-Men. And apparently Hugh Jackman was meant to make an appearance as well as Wolverine, but they didn't have access to the costume, and I don't think he was able to fly over to New York where they were filming, so it just didn't happen. It's a bit disappointing, but it wouldn't have made sense really. But it is crazy to think like what we have got now and what it could have been at one point in time. Well, I think that's pretty much everything I've got to say for this episode, so thank you so much for watching. One day I will be getting around to doing Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man 3. That might be a little way off yet, but I will be getting around to them eventually. Let me know what you thought about this movie. Where would you rank it in the Spider-Man franchise? Where would you rank the Sam Raimi trilogy compared to the other two? Let me know all those thoughts down in the comments. Also, if you have any suggestions for any movies, TV shows, games that you'd like me to take a look at, also let me know down in the comments. As always, please like, please subscribe, share this out if you want. It really helps this channel. If you want to keep up to date on everything that's going on here, hit the notification button, or you can follow me on Facebook, which is rewindreviews.youtube, where I share out like little tidbits and trailers and all sorts, and share out the thumbnails that I normally spend a bit too much time making. I'm also aware that this is actually the 30th video that I've actually made for this channel, so I'm amazed that I've been able to get this far so fast, and I'm amazed that the community is starting to build up quite a bit as well. And I really do appreciate every single bit of support that I've been getting from subscribers, from people who've been following on Facebook. It really has meant a lot to me, so thank you for that. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you next time on Rewind Reviews. See you guys.